what is that? I'm sorry?
Knowledge.
Knowledge. Gnosis is the Greek word for knowledge. Gnosticism came about a generation after St. Paul, where you had people starting to teach a Gnostic idea, that there was special knowledge, special insight that a few people had into the things of God, and if you had this very special knowledge, then you could exist on a higher plane, on a higher level. Well, that's part of Gnosticism. The other huge part of Gnosticism actually led into the teachings of Arius. And we now have another nice connection. Because Gnosticism followed the Greek ideas that spiritual equals good, material equals bad. That's Gnostic. You guys ever have to read The Death of Socrates in any of your classes? You read that one? High school maybe even? It's kind of standard reading. Any of you read it? Death of Socrates? Plato wrote it. Socrates is condemned to death. Remember why? The Greek city-state.
Yeah, it's been a while. He was in prison.
Yep. He was under house arrest. The Greek officials didn't like him because he was stirring up the youth and corrupting the youth. So they condemned him to death. And Socrates goes along with it. They have an escape plan all worked out. And Socrates is they're going to run him away. And Socrates refuses. No, the noble thing is to take my sentence. The noble thing is to go ahead and die. And he says, besides, what's the big deal with death anyway? Because death is actually a good thing because it frees me from this physical body and sets me free to go to the ideal realm, the realm of the spiritual, which is much, much better. That's what's going on in the Death of Socrates. It's a very Greek idea, and it is widespread in our culture. It's everywhere in our culture. The human body is a decaying thing. It pulls me down. It keeps me from being all that it could be, and I want to be freed from this human body. You hear this all the time when people get older, funeral homes, nursing homes, the kind of, and people who are convalescing or even hospice kind of stuff. You hear this all the time. Oh, he's been freed from the body at last. He set him free, and he's freed from this broken body, and it's far better. And in fact, that's Greek thinking. It's coming straight out of Greek philosophy. It's not Christian. Gnosticism taught that the material was bad and the spiritual was good. Gnosticism was the heart of Arius' problem, because the Greek world in Arius' day believed that the material was inherently evil. So for God to become a human being was inconceivable. God is holy. Why would he ever become a human being? Because to be human is to corrupt yourself. Because the body is, by definition, corrupted and evil.
That's part of it, but isn't part of the doctrine of the fall, though, that we're here on earth and the way our body is now is temporal, and the things that are happening right now are not eternal, and that's why we're waiting for the restoration.
But your body was created to be eternal. That's how it was created to be. And it's not a temporal kind of a thing. We're waiting for the full restoration, but we recognize that this is still God's creation and it is good. And so the human body is a good thing, not a bad thing. Now, it doesn't function the way it was supposed to. It gets broken, it breaks down, it doesn't cooperate, it aches and it hurts, and that's all a result of the fall. But it doesn't mean that the body is evil.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay.
That. So I'm just maybe, I don't know, the way, and I'm sure the way people are looking at that is that's in anticipation of the restoration.
Well, perhaps. But see, I hear too often people talking about the human body as if it was this cumbersome thing they just want to get rid of.
There's probably a fine line there somewhere.
Yeah, perhaps. See, I think what we need to recognize is the human body is not the way it's supposed to be. It's broken. Yeah. But it's still God's good creation. It's not bad. And so we don't celebrate when the soul is separated from the body. That's always a bad thing. It was never supposed to be that way. It's a violation of God's creation. It's a sad thing. And so our attitude is we can't wait for God to restore this the way it's supposed to be. And we grieve that the body had to fall apart. Things had to come to an end in this way. So it wasn't supposed to be this way. Okay? So what I'm trying to drive at here then is we have a recognition that the human body, as part of the physical creation, is a good thing. And this also has implications, especially things like sexuality, because sexuality for a long time has always been somehow being kind of greeted with suspicion as, man, it's just a little bit dirty and a little bit earthy and a little bit, animal-like, and it's probably not very spiritual. And even Christians for a long time have kind of struggled with that. And the recognition that this is God's good creation dumps that on his head, because the body's good, sexuality, good. And the sexual relationship between a husband and wife, good. Very good. Part of God's creation. Not a bad thing. Not just something for a little while. It's not a condescension to our sinfulness. It's not a concession to, well, okay, you've got this sin, I guess you got to go ahead and do it. No, this is part of God's good plan. And so it puts it in a different light altogether.
Doesn't Christ also say, though, that men will not take wives?
Sure. He says you'll be like the angels, neither given in marriage nor being given in marriage. And what that means, I don't know. And I haven't heard a good explanation for it yet. Does that mean that we will be eunuchs? No, not at all. I think maleness and femaleness is going to last for eternity. All right? And what use God will have for our sexuality in eternity, I couldn't even begin to guess. He has this way of not wasting things, but he also has a way of surprising us with the good stuff he comes up with. So when Jesus says we won't be given in marriage or be married, it's okay, fine. So we don't have to worry about whose wife I've got, how many wives I've got, or whose wife will she be in eternity. That's a non-question. What Jesus is really saying is, you just don't understand. You're thinking way too small. Let God take care of it. But does that mean that then we become, eunuchs for eternity? I don't believe that either. No, because our identity is bound up with our creation as male and female. It's part of who we are. Yep.
But eternity isn't focused on if we're marrying or...
No, absolutely not. It's not an issue. It's not a big deal. However, marriage is, though, a fundamental relationship, and it is the basis of all of the relationships within creation. That's why the fourth commandment, zeroes in on the husband, the parent-child kind of a thing, and we got the protection of the marriage in the sixth commandment. It's a critically important institution. Everything hinges on it. All right, so Gnosticism, Arius was running in the rails of Gnosticism with a deep suspicion of the material and of the physical, and of a hyper-emphasis on the spiritual. That's why he had to find a way to explain how God could become a human without getting dirty. And he did it by having a lesser God become human. Problem solved for Arius. Now, the thing we need to realize is Gnosticism has not gone away. It is still around very much today. And it's encountered in all kinds of places. And I see it frequently in the church. In Orthodox churches, where I see people who come to church and have rather Gnostic ideas. And they'll say things like, Pastor, I really want to just feel God at work in my heart. And, man, when I just go up there to communion, it's just bread and wine. I don't feel anything. It doesn't do anything for me. That's Gnostic. Because what they're doing is they're denigrating the physical, and they're running away from the material, and instead they're trying to grab onto some sort of spiritual reality. And that's what they're looking for. It's common. It is widespread in our people today. And we have a dismissal of the physical, the material, and an embrace of the spiritual. It's not Christian. All right. Questions here? Okay. So we have another problem with this kind of anthropology thing, and another issue that Kolb brings up, which is pretty helpful, which is quite relevant for today, is sorting out the distinction between, and here's where we'll get to our free will thing. Determinism and voluntarism. Okay? Kind of a hard thing to sort out, but I think pretty relevant. Determinism means what? What is the teaching of determinism?
God has determined where we will go.
Okay, God or some force has fixed everything. It's all set. Determinism, broadly considered, is actually just a branch of psychology, right? Remember B.F. Skinner? Operant conditioning, right. And Skinner's thesis was everything that happens is happening because of our environment, and we're forced to be this way, and really don't have a lot of choices, just kind of conditioned into us. So a deterministic sort of a thing says, why am I the way I am? Well, it's the genes I was given. It's the way I was raised. It's just forced on me by my environment or by my genetics, but it's all out of my hands. It's all fixed. It's all set. And I really don't have any choices to make. And you'll hear this kind of talk, for example, when you have the young person who does some kind of horrendous crime, and what is the defense that people make? He's a product of his culture. What are you going to do? You know, he doesn't know anything else. Who's really to blame? Society is. It's society who has failed here. And you hear this a lot. This is, the common kind of mantra you hear. So that's the determinism thing. So it's all faded. It's just the way it is. Voluntarism, though, says what? Choose. Free will. I get to be whatever I want to be. Voluntas means will. So voluntarism, it's all about my will, free will. Choices. Can be whatever I want to be. Self-made man. Choose your route. Do it. The American ideal. Be anything you want to be. I guess that's the old Army slogan. Now it's Army of One. Whatever that means. And so you take your course and off you go. You pursue the free will thing. That idea around? Voluntarism? Sure. Sure. We're all free to make our own choices. We do our own thing. Which one of these is prevalent in our society? Yeah, they both are. And they seem mutually contradictory because they are, but they're both around. And both of these are very common. So how is a Christian supposed to think about this kind of thing? What's the Christian way to think about whether we are determined or whether we are voluntary?
Neither one of them seems right.
Why is that?
Well, determinism, I've always felt like God knows everything. So even though he knows what I'm going to do and things, because he knows everything,
Yeah.
that's not, knowing what I'm going to do is not the same as making me do it.
All right.
On the other hand, voluntarism is you get into the faith versus works kind of thing, where it's nothing I've done it amounts to salvation, only what Christ has done.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't seem like either one of these is a Christian viewpoint.
All right. Good. Other thoughts? Anybody else? You guys agree with that? Or like one or the other? Yeah.
Well, I agree with him. Just a different spin on it. God, I mean, he gives us free will
Does he?
or we have the free will to do what we want to, but yet we are determined. We have a path. We have some sort of ultimate goal or something that I don't know about, but that God wants to use us for.
Okay.
And so both are active, but not 100% of one and 100% of another. It's kind
Okay.
of a mixed bag as well.
All right. So it's a little of each is how you'd prefer to look at it.
I don't think we have free will at all, because any decision we make is based on what God has given to us, and the bless, or just based on God and what He has done for us. And I don't know. I was
Okay.
I was reading some stuff on free will. And I just.
What were
the
you
whole-
reading?
Yeah, I was reading. Whoops.
Don't do that. So what were you reading?
Bondage of the will.
Oh, you were?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Does Luther agree that we have a free will?
Free will itself, no.
Yeah.
He said free will is of God.
Yeah.
And God is beyond us. We're not God, but even God is bound in being God. He doesn't.
Okay. Okay. Now, these categories, you're right, are not good. And our culture operates in both of these all the time and kind of picks and chooses whatever it likes. Sometimes people talk about, hey, I get to do whatever I want. I'm my own man. But then they'll complain about, oh, man, the government's just screwing us up. Or gas prices. Somebody needs to fix these things. Oh, man, what are you going to do? And it's like you just baited, resigned to this, and somebody up there is messing with me. It's all determined. What are you going to do? And you hear both kinds of things. And it's just we kind of slide back and forth. One minute I can do anything I want. The sky's the limit. And the next minute, I can't do anything. It's all fixed. We operate in both worlds all the time. And you're right. Neither one of these is really a Christian perspective. Kolb prefers the phrase to talk about we are to live as God's children. And that's what we're supposed to do, which is rather different than either one of these. We live as the children of God, living before Him, accomplishing the purposes that He gives us to do. Fated? No. Voluntarism? No. Now, more to the point on the question of what is the relationship between God's will and human free will. This is really a kind of a different issue, but we're certainly skirting on the sides of it, so we may as well go ahead and jump in here, okay? So the difference between God's will and free will. This is what Luther is getting at in The Bondage of the Will. And The Bondage of the Will is a fascinating book because you read it and you can't believe Luther's saying it. And you're wishing he wouldn't. And you're wishing he would back off a little bit. But he doesn't. And in fact, Luther, when he was an old guy, said, I wrote a lot of stuff in my career. You can get rid of all of it, except one, The Bondage of the Will. It's the one he wanted to keep. The one thing he wrote that we just didn't get rid of is the one that he insisted had to be kept. Because in The Bondage of the Will, what Luther stresses is that free will is an illusion. We don't have one. It's flat out. We don't have one. And the reason he argues that is because he says, if you give man a free will, then God's not God anymore. Because if God is God, things are happening the way he wants them to happen. And he's in control. And this illusion of free will fits real nicely with our desire to be self-made and have value and do our own thing. The voluntarism ideas, man, we eat it up. We like it. But it really doesn't reflect reality. And in fact, the big problem with free will is if you really believe in free will, then you do not believe in grace alone. Okay? Now, why would I say something so horrendously radical and unloving and unchristian sounding? Now, Todd.
When you have free will, you can make a choice to choose God. Grace is a free gift that we can't, because our will is tied to God's will, we can't come to the knowledge of Christ and salvation. It's a gift from grace.
Okay.
So if you can choose God, then you don't need grace.
All right. If you're making a choice, if you have a choice to make, either for or against God, it's not grace anymore. Grace means God does it all. God chooses, God calls, God delivers the faith, God keeps you in the faith, does it all. What role do you play in your salvation? You guys all know the pat answer. Nothing. So, does that mean you get to choose? Nope. Because if you get to choose, you're doing something. You're either making the choice, the right choice, the wrong choice. You don't get to choose.
But isn't that somewhat contradicted by Adam and Eve eating the apple? They chose to sin.
Yeah. Now, so you say, whoa, no, wait a minute. So the other side of this is we have a twofold reality. One reality is that God's will is going to be done. The other side of the reality is not free will. What it is human responsibility. So, Adam and Eve are not created as robots. They're not pre-programmed just to do what God tells them to do. And yet, God is God, and His will was going to be accomplished. But when a human being makes a choice, he's always responsible for the choice he makes. Even if he didn't have any choice in the choice, he's still responsible. Which seems grossly unfair and unreasonable, but it's precisely what the Bible teaches us. So Adam and Eve choose to disobey God. Was that within God's plan? We are reluctant to say yes, it was, but we have to ultimately say nothing happens outside of God's control. God's God. But who's held responsible? Adam. Who pays the price? Not God. Adam can't say, but this is happening the way you wanted it planned. No, that doesn't even get brought up. It's not an issue. What matters is Adam has rejected what God has given him to do. He's held accountable. He's responsible. So the better thing to talk about is not human free will, but human responsibility. And we are always held responsible for the choices that we make. God holds us accountable.
There's a secular counterpart to this in contemporary psychology, and it has to do with it's a gauge for how mature a person is or how their behavior is directed.
Okay.
And it's a progression that all people make. When you're a baby, you're totally dependent. If your parents don't care for you, you'll die. When you're an adolescent, you go through this period they label independence, but independence is an illusion.
Mm-hmm.
This is why men cheat on their wives and people do terrible things even into their advanced years because they're stuck in this illusion of independence. Maturity is hallmarked as interdependence, when a person realizes there's responsibilities and things in life and behaves accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something to that. I'm very sympathetic and very supportive of that idea that real maturity is not independence. Real maturity is recognizing the limits and the responsibilities and living within those, living underneath authority.
Curiously, beyond being the interdependence hallmark
Yeah.
of maturity, the next one is dependence again.
Yeah.
When you become elderly and people have to care for you.
Yeah, that's intriguing.
I've heard people too say, well, we don't have the freedom to choose God, but we can reject Him.
Yes.
And now, is Kolb? Is this what he's saying? Sin has bound the human will to turn its back on God. Is he saying that we're already created with our back to Him?
We're not created that way. We are that way because of the fall. We were created to be in harmony with God.
In the world we're born into, our back
That's right.
is to God.
In a broken world, we are born not neutral but enemies. This is very scriptural, very important. So no one is born neutral to God, but we are born as enemies of God. God must call us and turn us.
So there's still no rejecting. It's
See, can you refuse the gospel when God gives it? Yes. And God holds you accountable for that refusal. And yet,
in the human realm.
in the human realm, in the eternal realm, in every realm, you're accountable, you're responsible. You will pay the price for your rejection. And yet, to turn is not your choice. God turns you. So that's what I was kind of getting at before when I said, I don't have any choice. I believe because I have no choice. Of course I'm going to believe. Now, psychologically, I had the experience of making a choice to believe and staying in the faith and that kind of stuff. But in reality, God's called me. And I'm responsible for my choice. And if I would reject God, I'm going to be the one paying the price. And I can't say, but God, you didn't really try with me. God's going to say, no, you're responsible. You rejected me.
So would you say that concept of the rejecting is still in line with this thought? That,
I hope you're going to talk about double predestination. soon.
Yeah.
Now I'm getting confused.
Yeah, no, we will. Yes, we will.
So whether we choose or don't choose,
Yeah.
it's still within God's will, though.
That's what I would argue. God's will is going to be accomplished. And it's not just a matter of, well, He knows what you're going to do, and so then He chooses accordingly. No, God's will is God's will. But we're still responsible. And we'll talk about this more. Okay? We're at break time.
What you said, though, I mean,
No, go ahead.
you say we're born with our backs toward,
That's right.
and that's the whole, yeah. and
Can you go into
baptism
that?
too.
We are enemies of God. We are absolutely enemies of God. We are opposed to God. We don't have a spiritual bone in our bodies. We have no interest in God's things. By spiritual, I mean God's things. So we have no interest in God's things. What we're interested in is serving ourselves. God is the one who has to call us to repentance and call us to Himself. And that's the miracle of baptism. God is creating faith and bringing to Him one who is an enemy of His. And He does the calling. He makes us come back, and He's the one who brings us to Him. So when I say I'm in the faith, all God's grace. Grace means God does it all. I don't even get to choose. God chooses me.
What were you saying? Like the whole, you have somebody that's turned away from God. They used to be Christian. They turned away.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're
What, it's
responsible.
God's will to turn him, her back toward.
God wants him saved, but he's rejecting, and he has the ability to thwart God's will, and so it would seem. And yet nothing happens outside of God's will because God's God. It's a hard thing.
Well, when we studied the Old Testament last week, there were passages that read, God hardened their hearts.
Sure.
Right.
what that means.
God does his thing, and God accomplishes his purpose. That's right. And Romans 9 is really tough. I chose Jacob and not Esau. Why? Felt like it. There's no reason given. And well, it's because Jacob was better looking. It doesn't say that. And then you have the whole thing. You're back in the Old Testament. Why did God choose Israel? Were they the best? It's the scandal of particularity. Why? God's God. Who knows? And so, see, that's where the awe of conversion comes in. God chose me. I don't know why. I'm so grateful he did. And that's grace. See, front to end. That's grace. And as soon as you start saying, God offers, now it's my choice, you've just killed grace. It's not grace anymore. And see, that's the real problem with an Arminian, what we call decision theology, or your Baptist friends or your Nazarene friends. God's holding out the option, your choice. It's not grace anymore. If I make the wrong choice, I blow it. If I make the right choice, good for you. You did something right. Now, God does everything else. You got to do your little teeny part. That's not grace anymore. All right, let's take a 5-minute break or so. Come back. We'll pick up your questions and press forward.